I've gone into production of my pieces and I've made, well, I thought I'd made all of them, but turns out I miscounted. So I'm going to make some more of the pieces that I'm missing. So it gives me an opportunity to show you what I do. So I got, the first cutters I had made were 3D printed. And this is what came, and they're very accurate, but they're fat and they don't cut through polymer clay very nicely at all. So then I had these made, which are just made out of thin strips of metal, and they're not quite as accurate. They're all right though, and the only trouble with them is they really hurt your hands after a while, especially these little ones. These really get underneath your skin. So I will show you what I do about that. So I ended up using a combination of all sorts of different polymer clay. I was going to mix my own colours, and although I've mixed quite a lot of my own colours, where I could, I've bought colours that I don't have to mix. And I had to buy, I bought Sculpey, I bought Fimo, Professional and Soft, because these pieces are stuck on epoxy resin and then adhered to the wall with a cement-based adhesive. They don't need to be particularly strong, they're not going to be under any stress. So I didn't worry about the constituent of the clay. And I bought some, oh, I can't remember what they're called. I'll put a link below to all the ones I bought. There was a, I think it's Belgian make, and it had, well, actually it did have a particular colour I wanted. I couldn't get it and I ended up having to make it, so maybe I didn't use that one. Okay, I'm rambling now, so let's just get on. I had to buy a new machine. Oh, let me get my cutting blades. Oh, there they are. Right. So I had to buy a new pasta machine because I tried reusing old clay, reconditioning it, and it broke my machine. So that was a false economy. So I bought this machine, which is the Atlas 150. And I think it was about £55 from Amazon. Now for the red pieces, I have used two different shades of red. Most of what I used was this true red, but then to add a bit of interest and variety, I've mixed in cherry red. Because if things are too uniform, they don't look handmade. So for that reason, I mixed the colours up a bit. This is all I have left of this shade of red, so I'll start with this. Now these cutters, I'll show you what I did to protect my fingers. Before I started, I wrapped them in micropore because that just stopped them getting cut and torn and sore and worn, which is what happened after the first day of cutting these pieces. And in fact, one of my fingers is still sore. This stuff is quite toxic, so if you have a cut and you get it in the cut, it's going to object. Your skin is not going to like that. So every day I start by wrapping my fingers, and this is something I do sometimes in my workshop when I'm making my stained glass. Now these pieces don't come off the cutter very nicely because they're too small, so dip in a bit of flour before you start. Doesn't seem to affect anything, and as you can see, ooh, it mostly comes out nicely. So this pencil has got a slightly roundy end, which means it pops them out quite well. when I first started my cutting, I tried really hard to get as many out of each sheet as possible, you know, switching around the direction of the cutter, and then I realised it was taking me so long. It was a false economy of my time, because once the clay is conditioned, you can re-roll it very quickly and easily. This sheet is cut on my number, it's still in there, my number 1 setting, which looks like it's about 1 mil, maybe a tiny bit more than 1 mil. As you can see, even with the flower, they do still get stuck in the cutter sometimes. And it doesn't seem to do any harm to the clay to remix it with a bit of flour in it, so don't worry about that. Now, what I do for counting is I tend to count the pieces on my clay and keep a running tally. And I always have a notebook handy, and I record it by the tray. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So 25. These cutters are lovely. And this is how I get the tiny fiddly ones off the clay. The less you handle them, or the fewer times you handle them, the better they are. And that's why I count them here and not in there. And then you do it again. So I think I needed about 500 of these pieces in total. So you've got to like repetitive dull work to do this sort of thing, which luckily I'm very good at. I have a very high propensity for repetitive dull work. But there is a skill in it, producing work that's as good the first day you start and a week later when you're still doing the same task. It does take a certain amount of aptitude, I suppose. So yeah, I put a book on. I listen to audiobooks, and or the Radio 4, and I quite enjoy myself really. I find it quite meditative. Oh, the other trick doesn't work so well with a small cutter. For getting the pieces, the cutter to come away from the clay without the piece inside it, is to slightly angle it as you push it down. So if you don't push it down straight, if you push down with a bit of a wiggle, oh, I've run out of places to cut now. They tend to come out better. So how many have I got now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There we are. Now I will just put these aside for a minute. Let me just show you that. Well, I won't show you, I'll tell you because I don't need them yet. Wet wipes are great to have to hand when you're using polymer clay. They clean the surfaces and your tools up beautifully. Now, I will do these bigger pieces to show you. This clay is called Accents, I think. Sculpey Primo. I thought it was. It's a pearl, anyway. Maybe it's the other maker's called Accents. Where is it? Bright green pearl. And it is slightly pearlized. It's not over the top, but this green colour is the central focus of my pattern, and I thought it was just quite nice to have a cheeky bit of pearl going on there. Although it's very subtle. If it wasn't subtle, I wouldn't probably have gone for it. A few specks of green, red, from the machine. But if you trap them inside, they don't do too much, cause too many problems, basically. But the purists among you will be shocked and appalled, probably, that I don't clean my machine in between. Now, let me show you what happens when I cut with this cutter. Apart from the fact that it's incredibly difficult to get through, it sort of squashes everything flat and doesn't do a nice clean cut. So that was a shame, but it didn't work. Let me see if, right, so that is much better, although I'm not going to use that one. Because I'm going to want these to have a sort of handmade ceramic look, they are imitating Zellige tiles from Morocco. I am not worrying about the surface finish too much because Zellige tiles are far from perfect. I'm going to redo that one, I think. The pearl gives a sort of slightly marbled effect, which I like. Doesn't matter which way up you bake them, that's something I have also found out. Sometimes I like to take a fresh pack of clay and see exactly how many pieces I can cut of a particular shape from that one pack, and then I don't have to count as I go. I know that, for example, I'll always get 10 stars from one pack of Sculpey. So that's another thing you can do. I also weigh them sometimes after I've baked them and calculate how many pieces I've got that way. I'm going to pop these in the oven, and then I'm going to go into production making, let's see, I've got 20, that's where I need a calculator. So I need a lot of the red ones. So in the pattern, around each star, one of these little pointy red ones fans out, and for each star I need 12, so if I've got 20 stars I need 240 more red ones.